السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد, inshallah, everyone is doing well. This session is meant to address fiqh issues, especially during the month of Ramadan when there is a lot of fiqh issues in regard to fasting and zakah as well. Many of us like to pay their zakah during this month for the extra blessings and the rewards, and of course that's something that is encouraged. As all my fiqh sessions go, the point and the hope is that there's some conversation that goes on between me and the audience. So this is a time where you have the ability to ask me questions. I know Arabic, I know English, so please feel free to ask me in either of those two languages and ask me at any time. This isn't meant to be lecture based, where you just sit and listen to me until the end, but anytime you feel like you have a question or something that I said needs further clarification, then just please do stop me and be patient, because there is a few second delay in between what I am saying live versus what's being heard by you all. So do be patient, give me a second to respond to that. So what I want to begin with today is an issue that has been circulating even since before Ramadan, and I wanted to address it last week, but I didn't have time, and that is the concept of what's called a virtual tarawih. Can we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a group through the internet, right? Where the Imam is live streaming the tarawih prayer or the Jum'ah prayer for that regard, for that matter, and people are at home and they're following the Imam from the live stream. Is this allowed? Now, this has drawn in a lot of debate, right? A lot of debate, and I want to make sure I emphasize that, because you have some people who, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all, they think that religious scholars are just sitting back, relaxing, and they don't care about these issues and everything is haram. No, we can't change anything. We have to do the things the way we've been doing it for the past 1400 years, and that's it. That's the end of conversation. When that's really not what's going on. A lot of hours in terms of lecture time, in terms of research, in terms of discussion, has been put into the concept of virtual tarawih and virtual Jum'ah because of our situation. So this has to do with coronavirus specifically, and not a general ruling of doing a virtual type of worship, whether in a pandemic like this or without these circumstances. And you have a few scholars, reputable scholars, who say that this is okay. Not the Jum'ah so much, but Tarawih is okay because of our situation. There's a necessity. Because we are barred from entering the masajid and performing congregational prayers like Tarawih and Jum'ah, and because these are important parts of our tradition, then our circumstances should give us enough flexibility to allow this type of live streaming Tarawih and whatnot under certain conditions. So one of the advocates of this is a very, very reputable scholar, some who is very among the top scholars, the most senior scholars in our times today, and his name is Sheikh Muhammad Wild Ad-Dadaw, and he is Mauritanian, and I think he lives in Qatar today, or he goes back and forth between them. He's a Maliki scholar, one of the finest scholars I personally know of, and he's been advocating this. And his argument is that there's a necessity here. We are prevented from going to the masjid for a valid Shari'i reason, and therefore we can look into our alternatives as to how we can continue to honor Tarawih and Jum'ah prayer, but there needs to be conditions. The first and most obvious condition is that our situation today. We are prevented from going to the masjid by a Shari'i accepted reason, like the coronavirus, fear of illness and spreading the illness, which can lead and often leads to death. So that's the first condition. The second condition that these advocates place on doing this is that there needs to be it needs to be for a particular area. So people of a particular area who are of the same time zone and even of the same salah timing. So what you notice is that, for example, in San Diego, Maghrib prayer might start at, let's say, 7:30, whereas here in Orange County in Mission Viejo, it's at 7:34, whereas in northern Los Angeles it's at 7:40, something like that. So if a virtual Taraweeh were to happen, it needs to be between a community, or the one following from home needs to follow someone who is in the same area. So that's the second condition. Someone in Mission Viejo cannot pray Taraweeh with someone in Mecca. It's just for obvious reasons. By the time it's Taraweeh time for us, they're already in the early morning hours, right? Or even close to Dhuhr time. When they pray Taraweeh, it's 10 o'clock by us. So it simply doesn't fit like that, and that's not the way it works. So it would be people who are in South Orange County can follow Mission Viejo or Irvine, according to this position. That's the second condition. The third condition is that the way this is being streamed, the quality needs to be high enough to where there's only a few second lag or delay, 1 or 2 seconds. And they frame this by saying the following, that the imam and the ones following from home need to be in the same position. Meaning, if the imam says Allahu Akbar and goes into ruku', right, the delay needs to be short enough to where the ones following will enter ruku' before the imam lifts and stops the ruku', goes up. Wa alaikum assalam, Amani, ya hala. Amani is my cousin from Jordan. She gives her salam. So the ones following from home need to be able to follow the imam and be in the same position he is in, right? So these are a few conditions that are placed on it. And the evidence that they use is the following. Number one, the necessity, and with necessity comes flexibility. The second thing is that the concept of transmitting sound, right, is similar to the concept of hearing a delayed sound. What does that mean? Back in the day, right, they used to build the masajid. The architecture was so advanced for that time where they would utilize certain architectural structures, like domes, for example, to more effectively distribute and spread sound. So you'd find domes in every, let's say, 10 square meters. You'd find a dome above the people praying there. Why? Because through these domes, I don't know the exact science behind it, but through these domes, the sound is able to circulate the entire structure to where you'll have a very large masjid, and the ones in furthest back can hear the imam, even though the imam doesn't have a speakerphone. So what happens is the imam says Allahu Akbar, and there's about 2 or 3 second delay before the people in the back hear, by the time the sound transfers from place to place to place to place. Likewise, speakers and speaker systems, right? Speaker systems are transmitting sound. It's not literally the same voice of the imam, but rather by whatever the process is of all the electronics, it wires the sound that it's hearing and then retransmits it through a device, right? So the same concept can be seen in live streaming. What you are seeing is an electronic replication of what the camera is seeing. So technically, when you're looking into your screens, whether it's phone, TV, your computer, you're not literally seeing me. You're seeing a replication, a mirror of me. The same thing goes with my sound, right? You are hearing a replication of what I'm saying based on the sound. So they say that this has always been something that was accepted and utilized. So just because things are electronic doesn't change that reality. So that's okay. And then the third thing is that when it comes to space, this is where the biggest issue is. Now, the first two things, the second opinion that doesn't allow virtual Taraweeh will say we accept these things, but the problem is the third one, and that is the distance between the congregants. How far can they be, right? If the Imam is, on Madeira Road praying Taraweeh, and you have someone in Laguna Niguel, at the end of Laguna Niguel, close to the beach, or Laguna Beach, you're talking about 10 miles between the two. That's a big distance. Do we consider someone 10 miles away from the Imam to be part of the congregation of the Imam, right? Even though congregation has the meaning of, closeness and proximity and physical closeness. So this is where the real issue is. Now, you find in majority of schools, in fact, I think, if I remember my research correctly, all 4 schools say that some space is okay, like, for example, a small river or a road. So the Imam is praying and there's a road between him and the congregants, but that road is about 10-20 feet long. That's okay, no problem. But they also said that if that's a wide space, or before that, another example is that sometimes you'd have in the Navy, the Muslim Navy, ships or merchants in the Navy, or merchants traveling. What would happen sometimes for Jum'ah prayer, they'd get their ships close together, and the members of each ship would follow one Imam on one particular ship, right? So they said that's perfectly fine. However, the question then becomes, what if that space is really wide? What if that river is a mile long, like the Mississippi River at some points, right? What if that road is extremely wide? Are they still part of the congregation? Most of the 4 schools, if not all of them, said that that's not allowed. Okay? If the masjid is huge. Now, the advocates of the first position will say, look at Mecca, right? The Haram of Mecca. It's massive. I mean, it's 4.5, if not with the new construction, even bigger than that, 4.5 kilometers squared. I mean, most of us have been there, if not all of us, and we know how massive it is. Yet, you'll find someone at the furthest point of the Haram praying with the Imam, who is maybe a kilometer away from him or her, right? However, the response to that would be that all of this area is the masjid. So anyone who's in that area, even though it's massive, is still part of the masjid. And Umar radiallahu anh said during his time that if this masjid were to extend to Sana'a, I mean, you're talking about 1,000 kilometers, 600 plus miles. If the masjid of the Prophet were to extend to reach Sana'a, then all of it would be part of the masjid, right? But look at the wording, part of the masjid, within the masjid. So distance between rows within the same structure, the same masjid, even if that structure was enormous, then we're not too concerned about the distance so long as the Imam can be heard or seen. The question is, what if they're outside of the masjid? And the majority of people today say that Jummah and Taraweeh cannot be performed through virtual means. Why? For that reason, the distance. A second thing is, well, what's the necessity? Right? When we say there's a necessity for something, it means there's a life or death situation. There is no alternative, right? If someone is starving and they're in the desert and they have the ability to eat swine meat and to eat deer meat, right? And they don't like deer meat. It makes them an upset stomach, or they don't know how to eat cooked deer meat, right? That doesn't give them the right to the permissibility to eat from the swine. Just because that alternative might not be the most ideal alternative does not make the forbidden or the impermissible permissible in that regard. So the same thing with our current situation. There is an alternative to Jummah prayer, and that's praying Dhuhr at home, right? And there's an alternative for Taraweeh prayer, and that's praying Taraweeh at home. We don't need to pray Taraweeh. We don't need to be in the masjid to pray Taraweeh. Now, in normal circumstances, we highly encourage that to get the extra reward, community feeling, praying behind the Imam, the commitment. A lot of times, often when we're home, we get lazy, right? We eat too much, we're eating sweets, we get distracted with our family affairs, we watch a movie, we're resting, and then we say, oh my God, there's not enough time, right? So we encourage that in terms of normal circumstances, but in our circumstances now, Taraweeh can be performed at home. So there's an alternative, thus it's no longer in the necessity category of what we need to do. Now, this is personally where I'm at today. And this is where most scholars are at today, that this virtual means of worshiping as a congregation is not to be done. Now, we respect the other opinion, but this is the majority opinion that I personally feel more comfortable with. Now, I should make it clear that time can pass, and you'll find, and it's possible that people will gradually shift over to the first position, to more openly or more comfortably accept virtual means of performing religious rituals when the circumstance necessitates it. So there's flexibility here. It's very sad when you find some people saying, oh, these scholars are so hard-headed, they don't want to do anything, they don't want to update, what's wrong with it? That's not the situation. If someone who's saying that is very ignorant, right? Muslims, alhamdulillah, have always been embraceful with technology and whatnot. Sure, there might have been a situation in Pakistan where when speakers first came to the scene, that scholars said, we don't want this to be used, and right? But that's not indicative of the rest of the Muslim world, right? Personally, I don't know of a similar situation in the Middle East, for example, or other parts of the world. So there is that flexibility. The conversation continues to be engaged, and as of now, the position I have chosen is that Taraweeh has to be prayed at home, and the congregation, in order for a congregation to occur, there needs to be that physical proximity. So that's in terms of the virtual Taraweeh. Please, if you have any questions on that, clarifications, do let me know. Until I get your questions, I will go ahead and begin the next topic, and that is some branches when it comes to issues of the fiqh of fasting. Does this cause someone to break their fast? Is this permissible, etc.? So one thing that's very important to remind ourselves with, and I hope this has become something, some common knowledge by now, and that is someone who mistakenly eats something, or they eat something forgetfully. So they're sitting down, they have a drink, and they forgot that they're fasting. It happens. It happened to me, before. Someone forgets that they're not allowed to do this, or they're not allowed to, for example, whatever it might be. So they forgot that they can't do this, they did it. Is their fast broken? As I mentioned last week, and I mentioned every single week of Ramadan, in the past Ramadans, this Ramadan, and in the future Ramadans as well. If you ever doubt the validity of your fasting, continue to fast and ask someone. Ask an imam, ask a scholar, did this break my fast or not? Do I need to make up my fasting? Until you get the answer, continue to fast. A lot of times, what happens is someone drinks water, forgetting that it's Ramadan. They forgot it's Ramadan, they forgot they're fasting, they drink water. And they think that their fast has been broken, so they continue to eat and drink the rest of the day. Now, as we know, drinking forgetfully does not break fast. But afterwards, when this person started to eat consciously, right, knowing that it's the daytime of Ramadan, now they have intentionally broken their fast. And someone who intentionally breaks their fast needs to pay a very harsh and severe expiation. It's not make up a day sometime during the year. Now they need to make up 60 days sometime during the year. 60 days, not one day, 60. Or they need to feed 60 people, which is $600, right? If not more. So it's very serious. You ever doubt your fast, the validity of your fast, then continue to fast until you ask someone, and they'll tell you what to do from there. Okay. Another thing is someone who, let's say they have mucus in their throat, they have a frog in their throat, right? Or, for example, they have saliva in their throat, in their mouth, and they swallow it. Or, for example, they have some mucus from the nose. You kind of inhale a little bit more strongly, and then it enters the throat. Do any of this break fast? No. What breaks fast is something that comes from outside the mouth and then it's placed or enters the mouth intentionally. Okay, so it has to be something coming from outside of the mouth. Someone, for example, who's flossing and their gums start bleeding, or something happens and their gum starts bleeding and they swallow the blood. It doesn't break the fast. So long it comes from the mouth, it was coming from inside the body and remains inside the body. Now, someone who, for example, were to, I'm trying to choose an example that's not very gross, but let's just say they have some spit and the spit comes out of their mouth to where now it's on their lips. Just wipe it off. Don't swallow it again. Okay? So something that's in the mouth then becomes external to the mouth. If it's placed back in the mouth, it breaks fast. Okay? But, it shouldn't be expected that someone is going to do something like that because that's pretty gross. Now, and we spoke about needles and shots and needles. Anything that enters the skin does not break fast. Doing hujama, the cupping, right, does not break fast. As for the hadith in this regard, just to kind of be concise here, the hadith in that regard is held to as discouragement of that. The Prophet ﷺ is discouraging these practices. Why? Because someone who is receiving the cupping, they're losing blood. Now the body needs to replenish that blood, and they don't have the resources, the food resources or the liquid resources to do that, and then it drains the person. Now, throwing up, whether it's intentional or not, does not break fast. Again, so long as the person doesn't take that vomit from after it's come out of their mouth and then swallow it again. But again, this should be besides the point. Engaging in forms of intimacy with your spouse does not break fast, even if it's kissing. The Prophet ﷺ is narrated that he would kiss his wives during Ramadan while fasting. Of course, what is forbidden is the intercourse, and that's should be also common knowledge. Likewise, masturbation, please excuse the context and the content, but it needs to be spoken about. Masturbation does break fast, whether it's male or female. So this isn't allowed, and especially it should be made well known that this shouldn't be practiced. It shouldn't be practiced ever, but especially during fasting, because it does break fast. Let's say someone is having some playtime or having a little bit of romance with their spouse while fasting, and they feel that some sexual fluid was released from their body parts. That doesn't break fast. Okay, it breaks wudu, but it doesn't break fast. Someone who wakes up in a state of major impurity, for example, they had a relationship with their spouse prior to Fajr, and then Fajr entered before doing ghusl, before doing major ablution, or they went to sleep in a state of janaba, major impurity, and then they woke up after the adhan of Fajr before doing ghusl. Their fasting is valid. Likewise, if someone has a wet dream, that doesn't break fast, okay, because that's not intentional, it's not in our hands. Now, another big issue is, what if someone is eating suhoor, not realizing that Fajr started, or someone broke their fast thinking that Maghrib began, that Maghrib has entered. In both scenarios, there's a lot of debate in this, and there's a lot of differences of opinion. So if you hear one sheikh saying something different than what I say, it's because all of these opinions are out there and they're all valid, inshallah. And it's about what evidence best supports the opinion. And so the opinion I give fatwa with is that someone who unknowingly eats after Fajr or continues to eat after Fajr has begun, or breaks their fast before Maghrib began, thinking that Maghrib did begin, in both situations, that person is forgiven. It's overlooked because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He overlooks an action that is done unintentionally or based on improper knowledge, or they thought something was right when it really wasn't. So that's for both situations. Now, someone who, let's say, they thought Maghrib entered and it's 7 o'clock, they looked outside, it was a gloomy day, it's very cloudy and it looked darker than it was, and they thought Maghrib began, so they ate. And then they realized, oh my God, there's still a half an hour left till Maghrib. They need to withhold eating from eating until the time starts, okay? So just because they accidentally ate does not mean they have the right to continue to eat afterwards. No. Again, anyone who has any questions, please feel free to write them down in the chat. Okay, when it comes to making up fasting, so a sister who has to make up some days of fasting, a lady who is pregnant and didn't fast, or she was nursing and she didn't fast, a man who was traveling, didn't fast, or was ill and didn't fast, how do they make up fasting? I bring this up because there are two different opinions. One opinion says you just make up the day, and that's what I give fatwa with. There's another opinion, and I often hear this, is that you make up fast and you pay the fidya as well. So you make up fast and you feed one poor person, which is $12. Okay. Yes, some opinions say that. However, I beg to differ. Why? Because the Sharia, if we need to make something up, the Sharia doesn't ask us to make it up twice. We make it up once. So if we fasted a day outside of Ramadan to make it up, then we have made it up, right? Fidya, for those who cannot fast, is meant to make up the fasting. So both serve as an independent mean of making up a missed fast, whether it's because of something temporary or something permanent. So the Sharia is not going to ask us to do two things that each independently make up fast. It's one or the other. So for those who are able to fast, they make up fasting, missed days by fasting outside of Ramadan. And they're allowed to choose whenever they want to. Of course, the earlier the better, because you can get that out of your book of deeds and your responsibilities. But if someone, it's difficult for them to fast and they would prefer to fast in the winter time, that's perfectly fine for them. There's no fault there. So for those who have a temporary reason to break fast, then they make up fast outside of Ramadan whenever they like. As for those who have a permanent reason for breaking fast, then they pay the fidya. In our current circumstance here in America, it's $12 per day. And they are more than free to send it to another country. However, they pay based on their locality. So if someone wants to send to, let's say, Jordan, right? They pay $12 per day and they send that to Jordan. And the transaction fee or the transfer fee is on the individual. It's not taken from the fidya amount. So let's say an elderly individual, did not fast all of this Ramadan, so they pay fidya, that's $360, and they want to send it to Jordan, right? And it's, let's say, $10 as transfer fee. That $10 is not subtracted from the 360. They send the 360, and on top of that, they put the $10. Now, in Jordan, the amount of fidya is around, something around $2, $2 or $3, something like that, right? So technically, someone who doesn't fast all of Ramadan in Jordan would pay 3 times 30, $90 or so, right? Whereas in America, it's 360. Why? That differs based on locality, right? Here in America, the way it's calculated is that the standard meal, something that is standard in meals, that is considered to be what's called qut, the normal meal of a land. So in America, really it's meat. In every meal, or almost every meal, there's some form of meat. So we'll take, for example, ground beef, right? And then we'll calculate how much ground beef is needed to feed a person, and then they come out with $12 or so. In Jordan, it's not meat. It's actually bread. In every meal, a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you'll find bread on the table. And bread is a lot cheaper than beef, obviously. So that's why there's a difference. So someone sending from America is going to send $360, even though in Jordan, that amount would be $90 or so, right? Because they pay based on one's locality. Now, it's preferable and definitely encouraged, and the scholars highly promoted this, that charity and fidya and expiation, all of this money stays within the locality of the person. And until the locality becomes self-sufficient, everyone is okay, and then you go to the next city. So we take care of everyone in our Southern Orange County. If everyone in Southern Orange County is okay, then we go to the next cities. We'll look at Irvine. We'll look at Central Orange County, Northern Orange County, whatever. Again, I'm not saying that it's haram or forbidden to send money overseas, but it's preferable that it remains within our locality until our locality is self-sufficient. And then finally, as I mentioned before, just to reiterate, someone who breaks their fast without a shari'i reason, right? Their kaffara is fasting 60 days for that day. So someone who doesn't fast for the entire month with no excuse, right? They have to make up 60 times 30. How much is that? 900 days of fasting for 1 month. How about the people who haven't fasted for 10 years, right? If they're not able to do that, then they feed 60 people per day. So 60 times, let's say 10 for the sake of making math a little bit easier, $600 per day, right? And then you times that by 30. That's $9,000 per month. Imagine someone who hasn't fasted for 10 years. It's $90,000 in expiation that they have to pay, right? So do be careful of that. And I reiterate, and please share this with other people. If you are not sure of the validity of your fasting, continue to fast until you get it clarified and cleared up with your local imam or some scholar, okay? So do be careful of that. Let's go ahead and stop there. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So anyone who has any questions throughout the week, please feel free to drop me an email. My email address is Tariq, Tarik, @ocif.org. And inshallah, just give me a day or two to answer it, because I'm a little bit overwhelmed, and since my office hours have shifted drastically due to COVID, I'm not as on top of my game in terms of answering my emails. So please do be patient with me. Inshallah, I'll get to you shortly afterwards. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.